Hey, Composing Gloves here, and today we're going to be talking about augmented triads. So augmented and diminished, because I just want to do them both in one video, and then the rest of it's going to be you pretty much making these on your own so that you're quicker at it. And the rules are pretty simple. So once you understand, I'm assuming you know your major and minor triads cold. You are like solid. I'm not going to lie. The way I memorize these is the way you might have done flashcards or just written them out a bunch of times or whatever. I learned scales and triads and chords and sevenths and all this stuff via the piano. Like I just played the piano a ton. And as a result, they just happened to come with the territory. So everyone learns different. I started out learning it like this crazy way. I found piano to be a way easier method to learn for me though, and I wanted to learn to play the piano super bad anyway. So I was already practicing a ton, and it just happened to be a thing that I was like, all right, and I was extra excited, more motivated. So what is an augmented and diminished chord? Well, that is when we, as you can recall, manipulate the perfect intervals. So here, let's make a C major chord. So it's C, E, G, right? So I know we've pretty much skipped. I'm not going to be like breaking down how simple it is because I can only do that so many times without going insane. So at this point, again, emphasizing, you should know these things. And you should also recognize the fact that major and minor triads are based on stacked thirds. I brought up the fifth relationship because it is useful to see, but you need to become very familiar with the idea of stacking thirds and other ideas like that. So now we're going to look at the idea of stacking the fifths and how that reacts to things, but it also has to do with the third relationship. So it's sort of weird. So an augmented triad is when you have a major third stacked on a major third. You could choose to see it as a major third and an augmented fifth, but it makes far more sense that it's a major third stacked on top of a major third. So here we have a C, an E, which is a major third. Now, how do we get E to G to be a major third? You simply sharp the major third. Again, if you play piano, this becomes outrageously simple to see. If I had the money, I'd buy a second camera angle and put my piano in view so that I could just show you on the piano. But you should seriously consider it. So this is a major chord. This is the augmented C major chord. And you simply raise the fifth a half step. That's one way of thinking about it, but the way it was probably came about was a major third on a major third. The reason I say that is because now we can make a diminished third. That is when you have, you guessed it, a minor third on a minor third. So this E becomes a minor, and this, there's got to be a way to change what selection you have. This becomes a minor. So we have C to E flat, which is a minor third. So here, minor third. And then we need E flat. We need that to have a minor third. That would be to F sharp. But because we are moving in the key of C, it would be more appropriate. Well, okay, here's the thing. When you're making a chord, there are occasions where you will have sharps and flats in the same chord. It's however very frowned upon. Not a cool thing to do to a musician. Only if it's like the only really appropriate way to spell it. You generally want to keep flats in your chord and sharps in your chord and just stick with one or the other. So here it's an E flat. It's easier to think of because we're moving in C minor basically. For now, we haven't really assumed a key because we're not composing anything really. But so we were going to do a G flat rather than do an F sharp, because F sharp, yeah, sure, that could look pretty pleasing, but also look at this. If we do F sharp and we put a sharp there, that's just, oh yeah, that's a mess. You don't want that. So it's easier to just see it as a flat. So I'm just sort of giving you some convention things that like, it's just easier to do it that way. If you play an instrument, you'll probably just do it by instinct. You'll just think in those terms. And if you've learned your scales, you'll probably just think in those terms too. But if you play piano, it's even easier because you're like, oh man, I've never seen that crap before. That's freaking weird looking. But for you people who don't know. So we have G, and so this is a minor third on top of a minor third. It's referred to as a diminished chord. When we get into sevenths, diminished chords become so cool. But until then, and augmented chords too. But until then, they're a little bit boring because there aren't a lot of uses for them in the root position triad form that are very, as far as writing popular music is concerned, it's just not really there. But they're fabulous for changing keys and doing a whole bunch of other wonderful things that we'll talk about as we get into sevenths. because of the way the scales line up. When I started seeing the relationships, this is stuff I discovered on my own, but I like stopped my theory progression for quite a while, and I was practicing chords and trying to see relationships on my own. And I ran across this, which is one of the principal uses of sevenths, but I found it on my own. It was like discovering how to like do some math function all on your own, even though it was academically already known. You like discovered it. It's like a whole new level of magic. Like, it's just like, man, it's so cool when you accidentally discover a thing on your own. It's like you discovered it. You didn't have to have someone else tell you about it. So it's just really cool. So for example, this is why diminished. So here we have a C major. I'm going to flat the third. So we get a C minor, or lower the third is the appropriate way. But musicians, instead of saying lower the third, will commonly say flat the third. They'll say flat 3, even though if you're doing a major scale, you didn't necessarily flat it. You may have made it a natural. So I'll give you an example of that up next. So we have a C minor chord now because we flat the third. Now I will flat the fifth. And now, sorry about that. And now we get a diminished chord. Now there is now you might be saying, what if I augment the fifth? Well, now you've created an entirely different chord, but we haven't covered inversions yet. And so we are not going to talk about that. But it's actually, if you listen to it, when you have a minor third stacked on a augmented fifth, you've actually created, in this case, it would be a G sharp major triad. But we have not talked about inversions yet. And you can't see my piano keyboard. So I'm just telling you this stuff out loud, which isn't not necessarily the best way to teach this. So anyways, this is C minor. Now let's talk about this idea of flat third, flat fifth. What if they say, play a D diminished? And then they say, oh, what do you do? You say, oh, you play a D and then you flat the third and fifth. Well, think about this. A D major. Whoops. Let me change this to a sharp right now because music score is a little annoying that way. So it's a D major and they say, oh, you want a, or we could even go as far as just say, make this a diminished, to make this a minor chord. And you say, how do you do that? Oh, you flat the third. Well, guess what? Whoops, sorry. Wow, let me put down 2 notes there. This is annoying. You would just lower it to an F natural. I've got to learn how to isolate and select notes on this thing. There's got to be ways. Do I hold down control or something? Nope. But anyways, you just bring it down a half step. So they'll say you flat the third, but in reality, you just made it natural. So you lower it a half step. So just some terminology things you need to be aware of. So a diminished chord is imposed minor thirds. So a minor third on a minor third. And a augmented chord is 2 major thirds. And you're just manipulating the fifth, really. But that's where they come from. And you cannot have, if you have a diminished chord, you cannot have a minor third with a augmented fifth, because then you just form a different major chord. Academically, the way you get there could be argued is different and it still maintains that chord quality and type, but it's like it's not an argument really per se, because it's something else entirely. There's a much easier way to look at that thing, so we prefer to look at it a different way. That thing though, we'll cover more in detail when we get into inversions, and you'll see those things for yourself and be able to just draw those conclusions. They're not things I'm going to need to point out to you. So what you need to do now is you need to master this, because this again is one of those things that just stacks up just like everything else. So I want you to take your time, just go through and make all the diminished and augmented chords. You'll even notice that there are some interesting things that happen when you get to B flat major and what is it? There's like a number of them, or some of them are like the same notes. It's kind of an interesting deal. If you have any questions, that's for inversions though. So it wouldn't necessarily, I'm not sure if you discover this doing root positions. Anyways, it's not really a big deal. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.